Hello everybody and welcome to the Sociology Taster Session. I'm Mrs Bidder and myself and Miss Forster teach this subject. The topic area we're going to look at today is the Crime and Deviance module. There are others that we look at in sociology. We have family and households, education and beliefs, but I've chosen the Crime and Deviance module to do your taster session on just because it's definitely one of mine and Miss Forster's favourites. The first activity that I would like you to do, please, is look at the pictures on your screen, and I'd like you to pause this PowerPoint in a second and have a think about what all these people have in common. So if you pause it now for me and have a little think. Thank you for pausing. Hopefully you've had a good look at the pictures. Some might be familiar to you, particularly if you are constantly watching any documentaries or looking at the news, anything like that. The thing that they all have in common is they've been found guilty of either murder, manslaughter or attempted murder. And this links in well with what it is we are going to look at for this taster section. The first thing, or the next thing, sorry, that I'd like you to do is to answer or have a go at answering the question on your screen. How does the media portray criminals? So again, if you pause it for me in a moment, this should take you sort of 5 minutes, create maybe a mind map or a list on how you think the media portrays criminals. Hopefully that activity was okay for you and you've come up with some different ideas as to how you think the media portray different criminals. We'll be coming back to this question at the end of the session, so you can then kind of have a think about what you've learned and anything that you can add to your mind map. So as you've sort of seen here, the section that we are looking at is crime and the media. Within the crime and deviance section, there's about 10 different topic areas, and this is just one of them that we are looking at today. So it just gives you an idea as to the different topic areas and then how each one is split into different sections. What I'd like you to do for this activity is either draw me what you think a criminal will look like or does look like. Alternatively, if you are not great at drawing, even though it can be a stickman, just note down some of maybe the key traits, what they might look like, certain behaviour that they might display to others. So if you could just pause the video again now and spend about 5 minutes on that activity. Thank you for doing that. Normally in class we'd now kind of share some ideas, which obviously we can't do in this way, but hopefully you've come up with a few ideas as to what you think a criminal will look like or how they'll behave. A lot of these are normally quite stereotypical, and that's absolutely fine. That's kind of the thing I need you to be thinking about here, because all of our ideas on criminals do come mainly from the media, so they will be quite stereotypical. Most people usually write things such as male, younger, normally of a specific ethnicity, normally black. So there's a range of different things that you possibly have written down there. Others go for the opposite end of the spectrum with kind of more middle-aged males, but anything that you think is okay for this part, and again we'll kind of work our way through some content and you'll be able to revisit what you've done and see how correct you maybe were. So the first sort of main area in the crime and the media section is the actual relationship between the two. What sociologists say is that we live in what's called a media-saturated society. So it's the idea that the media is absolutely everywhere. It's all around us 24 hours a day, and they are obsessed with crime. Crime is a key central theme to media output. And what it's also become is a main source of knowledge about crime. So what we know, or what we think we know about crime, is actually heavily influenced by the media's representation of it. So everything, what that's saying really is everything that you know has come from somebody else, so it doesn't mean that it is factually correct. The media have many different representations of crime. Crime and deviance takes up a large proportion of news coverage. However, while the media do show a keen interest in crime, they do give a distorted image of it. And criminals and policing, it's not, all of it is very distorted. It's presented in a very particular way. To give you some examples to how the media does distort the image of crime, it over-represents violent and sexual crimes. It also portrays criminals and victims as older and more likely to be of a middle class. They exaggerate police success. It also exaggerates the risk of victimization. So it exaggerates the risk of you being a victim of crime. The idea is to sort of provide or instill in you a sense of fear that you maybe are going to be a victim of a criminal offence. They also report crime as a series of separate events when a lot of the time things intertwine, and they overplay extraordinary crimes. By extraordinary crimes, I mean kind of high-profile murder cases. They overplay them so that we as a society think this happens a lot more frequently than it does. The portrayals of criminals is based on a range of different things, but 4 key areas are different ages, genders, ethnicities, and social classes. So in order to be able to look at the portrayals of criminals in these different areas, you need to know how we as sociologists define each of these different areas. For age, nice and simple, obviously, we're looking at the differences between younger and older people. Gender, again, very, very self-explanatory, but it's the social differences between being a male or being a female. Ethnicity is a little bit more specific, so it is a social group where members share an identity. This can be based on their cultural traditions, their religion, their language. And then social class is a group of people that share similar status. So that could be the upper, wealthier class, we call the bourgeoisie. We have the middle class, and then we have the lower class, which is also known in sociology as the proletariat. The next activity that I'd like you to have a go at, linking back to what I've just told you, how we define age, gender, ethnicity and social class, I'd like you to have a think about how you think the media might portray each of these. So how do they portray males versus females? How do they portray different social classes? If you work your way through each 4 for me, I'm suggesting sort of about 10 minutes for this activity. So if in a second you pause it and then just write underneath each, if you make them a little subheading, write underneath each how you think the media will portray the 4 different social groups. So if you pause it now for me and complete that activity, roughly 10 minutes. Thank you for pausing there. Hopefully that was nice and easy for you guys to do. Generally working sort of our way through each of these, age, you tend to find that the media will portray the younger members of society in a worse light or a more negative way. Males also tend to be painted out to be more likely to be a criminal compared to females. It means sometimes if a female has committed one of these extraordinary crimes, they tend to really overplay it in the media because it is so unlike what we expect a female to do in our society. Ethnicities, you tend to find white or black ethnicities are more likely to be seen as a negative social group. And then social class, it tends to be a working class individual that's portrayed in a more negative light or more likely to be a criminal. Generally on the whole, young males who are white and of a lower social class tend to be the overall social group that's overplayed in the media. We are now going to look at two key cases that the media had a huge amount of influence over. The first one of these is the James Bulger case. Some of you may have already heard of this. If you haven't, there's a range of documentaries that you can watch that link to it. There's a film called Boy A. It is an extremely interesting case, but it's mainly interesting to me because of how the media portrayed it. So in 1993, two boys, Robert Thompson and John Venables, abducted a 2-year-old boy named James Bulger. They led him on a very long walk up to the railway tracks, and unfortunately he was murdered by beating by the two boys, Robert and John. The reason why this case is so interesting in terms of the media is because of the headlines that you can kind of see here on your screen, as well as a couple of other little key things. One key example with this case, how the media had a huge influence, is actually via the names. So James Bulger, throughout the media, was actually known more so as Jamie. His parents never actually called him Jamie, it was James. However, because they felt that Jamie sounded like a younger name, they changed it and they used Jamie throughout media reporting so that they kind of made you feel even more sorry and upset about the nature of the case. Another key thing that happened throughout the media portrayal is that Robert Thompson, and you can see him on your screen here, was portrayed as the main instigator. He was seen as the worst out of the two, if one really can be worse than the other. The reason for this was the way he was portraying himself in court. He wasn't crying, he wasn't looking for his parents in the same way, because his home background was a lot worse than John Venables. He had an alcoholic father, he had about 10 brothers, there were a lot of beatings that went on in the family, so due to that kind of more lower class and abusive background, he was portrayed a lot more as the main instigator, the main person to decide that this is what the boys were going to do that day. However, later, many years later, you can sort of see from more recent cases, it's John Venables that probably could have been the worst out of the two. So when they both came out of prison, John and Robert, they were given new identities. However, John Venables has now been back in prison 3 times for child pornography. Robert has managed to kind of just live as much of a normal life as can be. Nobody obviously knows where he is or what he's done. So it's quite a interesting case to look. One, obviously, the nature of what happened, but also very, very particularly how the media kind of had an absolute frenzy with this case, as I'm sure you can sort of imagine. But the key areas that they obviously changed to really, really tap into the public's emotions with it. For this case, what I'd like you to do is just a little bit of research. So it is one of the most well-known cases in the UK due to the media portrayal of it. It was very extensive, but it was very distorted. Hopefully you're all looking at this on a device where you can Google, and there are 3 things that I would like you to have a look at. Firstly, based on what you can find, what is your personal opinion on the criminals? Secondly, how do the media portray the killers? So that's Robert Thompson and John Venables. And then how did the media portray the victim and the victim's family? This should take you sort of 10 minutes to do. You can obviously spend longer on it if you would like to. Try and find some newspaper articles, try and find some more current up-to-date stories as well. But if you spend about 10 minutes having a little look at this for me, that would be brilliant. So if you pause now, that would be great. Thank you for pausing, and hopefully you found out some really interesting information about the James Bulger case. Any questions, obviously, please do bob me an email, let me know, or come and see me if you have any questions on this case. The second case that we're going to look at is the murder of Joanna Yates. The first thing I'd just like you to do is have a little look at the two suspects on your screen. So suspect number 1 and suspect number 2. I would like you to just have a very brief look while I'm talking to you here at the two pictures, and in your head kind of decide who you think killed Joanna Yates. Base it on the pictures that are there. The other thing I'd like you to base it on is if I told you that suspect number 1 is an architect and suspect number 2 is a teacher or an ex-teacher. Just see whether that kind of gives you any other feelings, other thoughts on potentially what might have happened. Both of these men were arrested for the murder of Joanna Yates. Suspect number 2, Chris Jeffries, was arrested first. The picture that you see there on the screen was everywhere. It was on all news channels, front page of every single paper, and I was at university sort of during this case, and I really do remember it, and everybody believed that he had done it due to sort of the way that he looked more so. It was actually suspect number 1 that committed the murder, but a lot of people, he was very overlooked because of the job that he had. But obviously after the investigation it came very apparent that it was him that had committed the murder. There is, I can't remember whether it's a documentary or a film that is linked to Chris Jeffries that's definitely worth a little watch, just because of how much that impacted on his life. He was a murder suspect and it was absolutely everywhere. I'd like you to do exactly the same task for me here. So again, it's another very well-known case due to the nature of the fact they got it so wrong on the suspect for such a long time. And again, the media portrayal was very extensive and obviously distorted because they portrayed suspect number 2, Chris Jeffries, as the person who had committed the murder for an extremely long time. I'd like you to find out a little bit more. Again, use Google, anything that you wish, and answer the following questions. So what's your personal opinion on the criminal and Jeffries? And how did the media portray the killer and Chris Jeffries? And then finally, how did the media portray Joanna Yates, the victim herself, along with her family? Again, I'm suggesting sort of 10 minutes for this. That's what I would give you if you were with me. But if you want to spend that little bit longer on it, you are more than welcome to. So if you pause the video again and work your way through those 3 questions. Thank you again for that. And I also hope, once again, you found a range of different pieces of information. I hope you found it an interesting case to look at and are able to see, particularly with these 2 cases, how big a role the media can play in our view of a specific crime that happens. The final activity that I'd like you to do now is to go back to the original question that we started with. How does the media portray criminals? So you'll have created some form of list or mind map. I'd like you to use now all of the information that you've gathered during this taster session, and I'd like you just to add, tweak, change anything that you had written down in the first place. So if you could spend about 5 minutes on this for me, going back over what we've done, looking at what you said right at the beginning, and just adding to and adapting what you have written. So that's everything from me for the taster session. I really hope that you have found it interesting and that it's something that you hope to study or would like to study come year 12 and your A-levels. I can't tell you enough how interesting some of these topic areas are. Really, you can get involved and look at so many things that are going on in society as well, like I've got you to do today. So thank you very much for taking part in it. I'm sorry that we can't all be together in one classroom so that we can go through it collectively together. But if you have any questions at all, please do either email me, email Miss Forster, or you are more than welcome to come and see me in my classroom, which is L26 up in the sixth form block, or come and see me in the Draco House office. So thank you again, and I hope you enjoyed it.